Good morning to all of you, and it's a pleasure to be here in the Big Easy with you all. I was looking at the agenda. In fact, I have to say it was really hard to find the agenda beyond the parties for quite a long time as I was trying to plan my remarks, but it was obvious that there was some serious effort going into showing you all a good time, and I suspect you had a good party last night. Needed a little extra coffee this morning? Well, I want to thank President Harris and Executive Director Yoakum for inviting me to come and talk to all of you about what I do. And certainly would like to thank the hosts, the Louisiana Guard, even though most of them, I understand, are not, in the end, able to be here for their own party. I do have Louisiana connections in my office. My deputy, Dave Dubois, is a proud son of Alexandria, Louisiana. And another of my staff, Patrick Campbell, served in OIF-1 with the Louisiana National Guard. So we definitely have the Guard and Louisiana represented in my office. So, okay, on to my remarks. How many of you had actually heard of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or CFPB, before today? Okay, some of you, but not all. Well, that's exactly why I'm here. I want you all to know who we are and what we do. How many of you saw the movie The Big Short? A few of you? Okay, for the ones who didn't, that's your homework. Go find that movie and watch it, because it's the best and clearest explanation I've seen of exactly what triggered the housing crisis that caused our housing market and our economy, really, almost to go right off the cliff. And it's also a really good movie, so I recommend it. But anyway, we were created because of that housing crisis. We are a federal startup. You don't get those very often. But when the economy almost went off the rails, the president and the Congress were trying to figure out what to do. And one of the questions they asked was, who was actually protecting consumers when all of this happened? And the answer was, there were, at the time, about 18 pretty good federal consumer financial laws on the books. But the enforcement of those laws was spread out among 7 different federal agencies. So what do you think happens, say, in a military unit if I give a mission to 7 different units that don't talk to each other? Is that a recipe for success? Not so much. So they decided they would create a new federal agency and give it the job of protecting consumers and migrate the power to enforce those consumer financial laws over to it. And that's us, the CFPB. So I guess by definition, I would say we're a 21st century independent federal agency that helps consumer finance markets work by making rules more effective, by consistently and fairly enforcing those rules, and by empowering consumers to take more control over their economic lives. We have the power to supervise those who provide you consumer financial products and services, as well as to write rules and guidance and to enforce the law. So, the agency, one of our biggest sections is the supervisors, and they have the power to go out to those who provide you consumer financial products and say, show us your books, and they have to do that. Obviously, you would think banks and credit unions, right? And we do supervise the biggest of those, to include one of your sponsors, USAA. A couple others that might be familiar to you would be Pentagon Federal Credit Union, Navy Federal Credit Union, and also the very biggest banks, you know, the names that you all know. But we can also supervise non-bank and non-credit unions that actually offer you consumer products that haven't really had federal oversight before. And that would include people like mortgage brokers, student lenders, payday lenders, the buy here, pay here auto dealers who write their own loans, the credit reporting bureaus, and debt collectors. For the biggest of all of them, we can go in and say, you need to show us your books, and they have to do it. Okay, so what happens? You look at their books, you do an exam, you find they may not be complying with one of the now 20 laws that we enforce. Well, we work with them to get it right. But if we go in and do an exam and find, oh, hello, this company is just flat breaking the law and doing it regularly, and there's a real problem here, then we have a very large enforcement division. And they can actually file civil charges against that company and also levy civil penalties. To give you an idea of what that means, in the just over 5 years since we opened our doors, we have returned over $12.7 billion to U.S. consumers, about 27 million of them. I think that's pretty impressive myself. And I will say that well over 100 million of that came out of enforcement actions that focused on protecting service members, veterans, and their families specifically. Depending how you count it, I think it's closer to 200 million. Okay, so in addition to enforcement and supervision, we also have something called the Division of Consumer Education and Engagement, and that's where my office falls. When they wrote the Dodd-Frank statute and created the Bureau, they said in the law that this new agency will have an office for the military, and that's me and my mighty staff of 10 people, most of whom are veterans, by the way. We have all the services represented except the Coast Guard. We're still looking for a coastie. So we have other special population offices, one for students, one for older Americans, one for those who are on the very lowest rung of the financial ladder, Office of Financial Empowerment, and we all work together, of course, because we have overlapping issues. But my office is obviously service members, and when they wrote it into the statute, they defined service members as active duty, National Guard, and Reserve, and their families. So certainly it applies to all of you because my office works for retirees and veterans and their families as well. I think if you've worn the uniform, then my office is going to serve you. So we do that. My mission was also written into the law. That doesn't happen too often, but if I have any doubt about what I ought to be doing, I can just go read the statute, and there it is. So, 3 things. First, to see that military personnel and their families receive a strong financial education so they can make better informed consumer decisions. Second, to monitor their complaints to us about consumer financial products and services and the responses to those complaints. And third, to coordinate the efforts of federal and state agencies to improve financial consumer protection measures for military personnel and their families. So, what am I doing under those 3 umbrellas? Okay, the education piece. How many of you know somebody that signed a contract and regretted it later because it was a bad deal? I think a lot of us do. It really bothers me to see that sort of thing happen, and I've seen some real doozies. There was one I saw, this was a Marine Corps staff sergeant. He took out an auto title loan, which is where you give the lender the title to your car. So if you don't pay up, they're going to take your car. So it's a very low-risk loan for them. He borrowed, I want you to get ready to do a little mental math. He borrowed $1,600. It was a 32-month loan, and his payments were over $500 a month. Yeah. If he had made it through the entire term of the loan, he would have paid $15,000 in finance charges for a $1,600 loan. And the awful thing is it was not an illegal loan. It was certainly an unethical one, but it wasn't illegal. But it also really bugged me that this guy signed that, especially since the terms were actually written at the top. The interest rate was 400%. And of course, the inevitable happened. He made about 3 months worth of payments, and then he couldn't keep up the payments, so they took his car. So they had his car plus the $1,500 that he paid back. And he had a bad mark on his credit record and nothing to show for this. So just makes me crazy when I see that sort of thing, and anything I can do to educate people so they don't sign something where they don't understand the terms, I'm going to try to do. So I had to figure out how to do it, because the Department of Defense is already providing financial education. You know, they're way bigger than I am. I only have 10 people. I can't be out there teaching classes. But the first thing I did was I went and actually watched the financial classes at basic training. I always ask people, how many of you who've been through basic training remember the financial class that you had? I usually get this response. Everybody looks at me like, what class? Well, there is one, believe it or not, but the problem is, you know, new recruits are tired, they're freaked out, they're scared of the drill sergeant, and they're really much more worried about their next meal and their next formation than somebody with a PowerPoint deck. So we thought, what could we do to help? And in the end, we thought maybe we can help by doing something that they can get that they get before they actually get to basic training, while they're in what's called delayed entry. So we designed an online curriculum. We did a lot of focus groups with folks in delayed entry and young people to make sure it wasn't lame, that it was something they would actually do. And we designed it like a graphic novel. For those of you who are my age, that would be a comic book format. And we drew it from actors, so sometimes the content comes to life in video. And we have about 5 modules. We're going to do a 6th, but we rolled it out at the beginning of this year. And the services have been using it, and we hope, the intent is, it's not some massive block of instruction that's going to take them 40 hours. You could do it in 2 easily. But it talks about some things we want them to know, like car buying, but also another one mentions the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act. That's really important, and important for all of you when you go on and off of active duty, because if you have pre-existing debt, pretty much any kind of pre-existing debt, including student loan debt, you have the right to ask for that interest rate to be reduced to 6% while you're on active duty. A lot of new troops don't understand that, and they may get talked into just deferring the loan while they're in, which is usually not a good idea because it's going to keep accruing interest while they're not paying. So we have a module on that. We have one on just kind of bad choices. And you can make choices throughout and see what happens. I always pick the bad things because I just want to know what the bad stuff is that happens. There's one where she ends up living back at home in her old bedroom at her parents' house because she got chaptered out for bad financial choices. So we hope it's just something that is going to send them to basic training a little better prepared than they would be otherwise, and before they get that first military paycheck. And I will say I've had the Guard express an interest in this as I've gone out and about, saying we would love to have something like this for that, what's it called, the weekend RSP? No, it's weekend, whatever. When you have them for a weekend, you're trying to figure out what to do with them. SRP, SRB? SRP. Okay, that thing. Anyway, the Guard is interested, and we expect to be rolling it out with them actually kind of right about now. So if you're interested in it, we certainly would love to have it spread far and wide because I think it's just some good information. And it's a very low lift. I have great respect for recruiters. I did not want this to be anything that added to what they have to do. So it's literally, here's a URL. We host it. We pay for it. Just go, take this curriculum, do the certificate that you took it, and show it to me. That's it. So very, very low lift for the folks who are out there and would have to put the word out. We also have another project underway for the other end of a service member's time in the military when they've recently transitioned to veteran status. We know the military is doing the transition assistance program, which is great, but sometimes we saw there was a lack of a warm handoff for somebody sort of on the other side of the gate to actually help. So we decided that we would do a program using some money from our civil penalty fund to provide free time with a financial coach for someone who was transitioning out of the military or a veteran in transition. We have 40 locations nationwide where we have coaches now. Mostly we put them in the Department of Labor American Job Centers. I'll be frank and say we thought about the VA vet centers, but we really had trouble getting traction with them. The Department of Labor, which has a gold card program for veterans, seemed much more eager to provide some space for our coaches to sit, so that's what we've done. And we've had, Pam knows more about it, thousands, right? Thousands of veterans now have taken advantage of this. It's great. I mean, you would pay pretty decent bucks for this if you went and paid somebody. And this is, there's some real success stories there some of our coaches have told us about, and including seeing folks who have gotten involved in the veterans treatment courts and have ended up being referred to our coaches. So we're excited about that one too. We also do have a bunch of videos online tailored to those who give advice to service members, whether it's JAGs, financial program managers, or veteran service organizations. And we've done them on student loan servicing issues, our mortgage rules, debt collection issues, veteran-related issues, credit reporting, and the Cfpb's complaint system. And if you want to look at them, you can go to our website, consumerfinance.gov, and pull them up and take a look. The actors mostly are CFPB employees. Apparently we have a lot of frustrated actors at the Bureau because we put out a casting call and we had to turn them away. There were too many of them. So I'm not going to overpromise, but we have won a couple awards for them, a Telly Award and another award from the National Association of Government Communicators. So another thing we're doing. Okay, that's some of the education stuff. Now, the second part of my mission, remember it's 3 parts, is to monitor the complaints that come into us from the military and veterans and their dependents. And I use the term dependents because that's a real legal definition there. I don't want somebody saying they're a military family member if they're sort of Aunt Minnie from Minneapolis. I want someone that's actually part of that immediate family. So the complaints can help the individual, obviously. They come to us, they have a complaint with the company. What we will do is then give them a complaint number and forward that complaint to the company in question, basically saying, hello, federal agency here, we have a complaint about you, please respond. And they do respond, in large part because we make our complaint database public. Not any of your personal information. There's no way anyone could tell who submitted the complaint. But our complaint database is public, and I will say I don't think any company really wants to be number one on that hit parade. So it has motivated them to be more responsive. Every week we hear from people saying, I tried to fix this myself for months. I could not get anywhere. I filed a complaint with you, and lo and behold, they called me 2 days later and said, sorry, obviously this is a problem, and fixed it. So for individuals, I think it's well over $2 million now for individual service members. Many more of them don't, it's not that they get money, but they get whatever the problem was fixed, whether it's an error on their credit report, because remember, we supervise the credit bureaus, or other issues. But I can tell you that it also can help our enforcement team, because if we see repeated complaints coming in about a certain company doing the same thing over and over, then we will refer it over to enforcement, and they may choose to take action on it. And that has certainly prompted a number of our military-related enforcement actions. Sometimes it can have an even bigger impact. Sometimes we get complaints about something we don't enforce. And one law we don't enforce is the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act. But we know the people who do. So we started getting a lot of complaints about the federal student loan servicer, Sallie Mae, that was repeatedly denying service members their rights. I think many of them were asking for that 6% reduction, that reduction to 6% I told you about, and they were getting the runaround or getting blown off or getting told they didn't qualify. So we got enough that we talked to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division and said, we think this might interest you. And it did. And 2 years later, they announced that Sallie Mae was going to have to pay $60 million back to 77,000 service members. Yeah, that was a pretty exciting day for us. We also sometimes use our complaint monitoring to drive policy change. To give you an example, the first military enforcement action we did was against a program called the Miles Program, a subprime auto lender that was not disclosing fees properly and overstating or making false statements about their extended warranties. So we did an enforcement action. It was about $6.5 million that went back to 50,000 service members. But it also triggered something bigger, because we looked at this company and we noticed there was only one way they would accept payment, and that was by military allotment. You literally could not pay them any other way. And we took a harder look, and we realized a lot of the companies that were lining up outside the gates of military installations were doing the same thing. And that was great for them. It meant they got the money before it ever touched the service member's bank account. But it wasn't so great for the service member, because they would lose some of the protection of the law by just having it go straight from an allotment. So we went to the Pentagon and we used it as a lever to ask a really big question, which is, why are you still doing this type of payment processing? It made sense in World War I when people got paid in cash and they had no way to get money home to mom or the wife or to pay for their mortgage. But now there's lots of ways you can pay people online, electronically, with the protection of the laws. So ultimately, we had a working group. The Secretary of Defense got recommendations from the comptroller, and in the end, one of the last things Secretary Hagel did before he left office was to sign a change to the military allotment system. And that was triggered by our question that we asked because of our enforcement action. Ultimately, he changed the allotment system. He didn't get rid of it, but he said you can't use allotments anymore to buy personal property, what I would call stuff. The cars, the jewelry, the furniture, the electronics, all those things that line up, especially outside active duty installations. You can still buy it all, just not with an allotment, and that's where the abuses were. So that's an example of how we can trigger policy change sometimes too. We do put out, excuse me, a complaint snapshot twice a year. If you're curious, you can look on our website and pull it up. The most recent one that we did earlier this year looks at the over 19,000 complaints we got from service members, veterans, and their families in 2015. And I will say right now anyway, the majority of our complaints come from veterans, which makes sense if you think about it. There's what, 22 million veterans out there and only a couple million actively serving. So we do get a lot from veterans. Last year, the top categories, any guess what the biggest category of complaint is for military? That's probably a hard question. The answer is debt collection tactics. We get more complaints about that than anything else, and the military complaints more than double the rate of the civilian ones on it. There are some real issues with that. The other in the top three were mortgages and credit reporting. I think largely accuracy of credit reporting. So debt collection, what we heard about that was that military consumers told us debt collectors were using the following tactics. Contacting their chain of command as a way to coerce payment. And by the way, we have done some enforcement actions where we told people it's not okay to do that. Putting a clause in the loan contract, the service member has to give them the right to contact their chain of command. Threatening punishment under the UCMJ. I love that one. Like a debt collector is in any way involved with the UCMJ. Threatening to have the service member busted or threatening to have their clearance revoked. And that is a hot button one that is a very successful thing to do, because many jobs in the military now, if you don't have a clearance, you can't do that job. And it is true, when your clearance is up for review, one of the first thing they do is pull your credit report. And if it's a mess, then it's going to flag for revocation. So that's a very successful threat, and they don't hesitate to use it. Contacting spouses, sometimes of National Guard units after a deployment, and trying to press the spouses to pay right away without the benefit of communicating with the service member. And I think the worst one that we heard about was hounding the widow of a service member killed in combat to pay them immediately from the death gratuity. So sometimes you wonder how low people can go, and it's pretty low. Other issues we heard about, identity theft problems when deployed. That was frustrating to us because so many of the service members who complained about that had not put an active duty alert on their credit that might have prevented it. So we do have a fraud alert fact sheet also available on our website. Please take a look at it. And if you're going to deploy or know someone who is, it's a way to protect your credit. Other issues are debt collectors attempting to collect medical debts that VA healthcare, Medicare, or other insurance should have paid, and then folks having challenges getting refunds from their lender for mortgage funding fees that should have been guaranteed by the VA with VA loans. So that's a little bit about the complaint piece of things. Now, the third thing, my outreach. So I've been to about, in 5 years, actually 5.5 years now, because I started 6 months before we opened our doors. I've been to 130 or so military installations and headquarters, and that includes National Guard headquarters in a number of states. Partly so service members, veterans, and their families know who we are and what we do, but also hear from them directly about their issues. I've had the dubious pleasure of testifying in front of Congress 8 times in this job. And one thing I always get asked is, what are you hearing? What do people need? What are the issues? So I want to be able to answer that personally. And I've seen a lot of your tags, actually, in their state locations, and also a lot of state attorneys general. I've had 22 of them personally go with me to military installations to basically say, we are here to protect you while you live and work in our state. So a lot of good support there. Some of the issues that certainly we see a lot. One is small dollar short-term loans. They're everywhere. If you Google military loans, you're not going to do it now because you don't have your Blackberries out, right, or your phones. But if you did, you would get literally millions of responses. And many of the ones that would come up are either very expensive credit or in some cases outright scams where they try to get you to send money in advance for the loan. It's very concerning to me when I go someplace like Fort Campbell, Army Post, and I turn right outside Gate 1 and I drive to Clarksville, and on the way in 4 miles I count 20 fast cash lenders. You know, that's not a convenience, that is a predatory problem. They know that all of you, when you're on active duty, get a guaranteed paycheck twice a month, and they want a piece of that. So very concerning, but there is something that can help you at least while you're on active duty, and that is the Military Lending Act. It was designed to cap loans to military at 36%. How many of you think that sounds high? Everybody's like, shh, that's high. Well, let me tell you, the average payday loan is 391% if you do an annual rate. So 36, I think, sounds a lot better under those terms. So it was written back in about 2006. But when you do a law like that, you write a rule to implement it. And unfortunately, it was pre-crisis, and the rule was written really narrowly, so it only covered just a few kinds of consumer credit: payday loans, auto title loans, tax refund anticipation loans, and it defined them really narrowly, and in the end, it didn't protect much of anybody. So Congress went back to the Department of Defense and said, we want you to do a study, tell us if this is working, and if it's not, rewrite the rule. The answer was, no, it's not working, so they rewrote the rule, and that goes into effect October 3rd. Businesses have to comply, and now it pretty much caps all credit, consumer credit to you while you're on active duty and your dependents during that time period at 36%. So I think some of these outfits that are lined up outside the gates of the active duty installations are going to fold up their tents. Hopefully, you won't fall for the ones online. Just remember that you do have that protection and that it's an important one. Other issues I hear about that concern veterans, there are definitely people out there who target veterans for their benefits. It could be a low-performing for-profit college that's aggressively trying to enroll a veteran using the GI Bill. We've seen a lot of that. In your packet, I think, at least in mine, I hope they didn't just put it in mine to please me, but you didn't get it. But anyway, there's a handout we did on the GI Bill, and there's some questions in there you should ask. You know, if you think about it, a college education is probably the biggest consumer financial purchase you're ever going to make, except for a house, and you owe it to yourself to make sure you're spending that fantastic benefit at a school that's going to set you up for success. So you need to ask, what's the accreditation? Is it national or regional? If it's not regional, your credits are not likely to transfer very easily. How much does it cost? What's the graduation rate? What's the student loan default rate? How many of its graduates are not working at jobs that will pay them enough to allow them to pay off their loans? What's the gainful employment rate of its graduates? The VA has gotten better at letting you see some of the answers to those questions, and they also now have over 1,000 caution flags on the schools that they list in their database. So go to the VA's GI Bill site and take a look. The GI Bill benefit is such a fantastic one, and it just really bothers me to see people spend it at schools that may not get them where they want to go. And I will tell you that there are a number that will not do that. So please, please be smart shoppers on that. We also see scammers trying to guarantee someone that they'll get them veterans benefits really as a way to get in their pension, to get in their money, to get into their accounts. So also very disturbing. And I'm almost out of time, so I'm just going to finish by saying, now that the large-scale combat deployments have come to an end, I think we may well see more financial challenges for military families who've grown used to that infusion of extra cash and benefits that go along with deployment. National Guardsmen and reservists who may have seen a deployment as a quick fix for financial problems will not necessarily have that option anymore. And a drawdown of forces will mean more newly minted veterans released from the military to make their way in the civilian world. So from my perspective, taking charge of their finances, but also receiving the protection of the federal and state laws that they are entitled to is going to become even more important for all of them going forward. And I'll just close by saying that it's really my honor and pleasure to represent all of you at this agency in Washington, and I will do everything I can to see that your money goes as far as possible and that you're not taken advantage of by companies that are breaking the law. Thank you.